Hello there. I am quite sorry about the profoundly awful video quality that is being dealt with here, but I have at last finished a Game of Thrones, and you can, like, I can see the video. I can see the video, and you here. I think you can read it that close. Although I think it's mirrored. Yeah, it is. But I really, really liked it. It was really, really, really good. Probably, in fact, the second best book I have ever read. First place still being. Actually, I was about to say first place is still 1984. Actually, I could go either way. In fact, I'm kind of leaning towards this as best book I've ever read, just because. All right. Going in depth into my thoughts on this. Uh, okay, broad strokes first. First off, it's just what makes it so good mostly is just that it's really enjoyable to read. It's just really fun to read. I don't know what it is about its prose or its characters, perhaps. The characters, it's basically Game of Thrones. Okay, let's get a little more analytical now. Game of Thrones is the non-sucky version of the last book I read and looked over, Hidden Empire. It's basically Hidden Empire done right. Or actually, since Hidden Empire came second, we should say that Hidden Empire is a Game of Thrones done wrong. So let's talk in terms of points of contrast between those two, that novel, which I don't know where my copy is, and this one. That novel. Okay, in that novel, everyone is either white as snow or black as sin. There is no in between. It tries to create an in between, but other than arguably with the Hydrogues, it fails because the alleged the alleged reasons that they have to act how they do either go unexplained or don't make any fucking sense. This gets moral ambiguity right. And it gets it right in a few ways. First off, it doesn't try too hard. And I think that's an essential part of why it succeeds. There's moral grayness here. Now, there's no question as to who we're supposed to be rooting for in any given event. I never once was unsure which side I wanted to win in any conflict. And I think the fact that George R. Martin allowed himself to pick a side from a narrative standpoint and to have there be a right side actually freed him up to be more morally ambiguous, whereas Kevin J. Anderson tried he didn't avoid picking a side, but he did kind of try a little too hard to make the bad guys seem like there was a legitimate case to be made in their favor when there wasn't, and it was stupid and insulting. I'm still talking about that book. This exactly did not do that. Cersei, the queen in this, is evil. I should say, by the way, spoilers. If you've not read this book, and you possibly ever will, don't watch this. Unless you've had it spoiled for you by the TV show. Which I am now going to allow myself to watch, because I've read this. And I'm like, you fucking Philistines, I'm not going to watch the TV show before I've read the book. Anyways. Cersei is evil, and she has redeeming qualities in a way that makes her feel like a real character. She's a character first, and she is, to a very limited extent, morally ambiguous second. A better example of a morally gray character in this might be Dany, Daenerys. Daenerys is beautifully morally gray in a large number of the things that she does. And it works precisely because I don't sense the trying too hard here. Or, you may have heard, if you're ignoring my instructions and watching it anyway, Eddard dies. There's your punishment. You may have heard that this is a character death fest. It kind of is. 4 major characters die in this 800-page novel. Those would be Daenerys' brother. Just more characters die, but just so you know what I'm counting as major characters. I'm counting Daenerys' brother, who there's not a single death, a major death, until 500 pages in, when that happens. Daenerys' brother, King Robert, Eddard, and Drago. Who, you could make a case for not counting Drago, I guess. I actually have heard that case kind of made. Well, it wasn't the case made. It may have just been someone didn't want to spoil it for me, because I was almost done. I thought all the deaths had passed, and so the figure of 3 character deaths was tossed around in conversation. But I would say 4, actually. Anyways. Well, I guess I just listed characters. That's a segue into character analysis. I'll talk about a couple of the characters, and just give my brief thoughts on them. First off, Eddard. Eddard was, throughout most of the novel, painted as the protagonist, which is why it's so surprising when he, of course, is killed. I remembered something else, but I'll finish my analysis of him before I go on. I really liked him. He has this thing where he puts honor before reason, but not to the extent that he is an idiot. And, you still get the sense that there's, he's doing irrational things and making bad decisions. Quite possibly, at least. But you never get the sense that there's no brain in his head. He doesn't act like an idiot. Which, and he's not a straw idealist. That's what's so beautiful about him. He is honorable. He's even honorable in a way that exceeds the moral acumen of his broader culture. He's not just an exemplar of his culture. He's almost like a partial representative of our culture transplanted into his own. Not in a way that it never comes off as implausible, but he and Winterfell in general is just a little bit closer to our values than is anything else in here. And he represents that, and he dies for it. And yet he never comes off as a straw idealist. There is another character who is a bit of a straw idealist, but that was just more brilliant. I wanted to mention is that this book, because it doesn't try too hard, manages to construct a scenario, manages to construct a tragedy where a lot of people are a little bit at fault, but there is no one person who can really be blamed for it. And what I'm talking about is Eddard's death. Here's basically what happens for those of you who have ignored my instructions. What happens is Cersei, evil queen, falsely accuses him of treason. And there's background into why she does it partially because she basically her children are not really the king's children. And so if she doesn't do this, she'll be exiled. Not that she should, and not that she doesn't deserve to be exiled, because she's not because her children, not because of the incest that because the children are not just not the king's, they're her brothers with her. Point is, she falsely accuses him of treason, and then tells the king, her son, Joffrey, who becomes the king after Robert dies, to basically conscript him. And in a non-certain deathy manner, too. He, thinking the accusation is legitimate, has him killed. So you can see where neither of them fully comprehended the evil thing that they did. She falsely accused him, but didn't want to have him killed. He killed him, thinking he had committed a legitimate crime. Not that what he did should be punished by death by our standards, which I think are better by any possible objective measure than these. But it's just so beautiful. And the thing is, if a lesser author tried to do the same thing, they would have made just such an active effort to make... I think what they might have done is either made Cersei or made Joffrey as sympathetic as possible. But George R. R. Martin didn't do that. He let Joffrey be a spoiled brat who's basically killing someone because he finds the idea of killing someone amusing. And because he doesn't really comprehend what death entails, because he's a privileged brat. He let Cersei be a lying fucking scum-sucking fucking bitch. Or I mean that's a very gendered word. But no. All right, I guess I'll move on to the next character. After I talk about one other thing, this is one thing. This is a flaw in the book. I've been singing its praises, but I do want to say one flaw in the book before moving on. Racism-y stuff here. Specifically in that everyone is white, at least as far as I can tell, except for the culture of slaving barbarians and their slaves who are from the same continent they live on. But the fact that the slaves are that way is only touched upon. There's a very clear othering going on here. That the good culture, well, it's not good, but the superior culture is the white people. and the other culture is the Asians, because Dothraki are Asians. And that's racist. That is racist. Anyways, moving on with the characters. Caitlyn. Bitch is a gendered word, and I don't like it because bitch, if you're a guy, you're an asshole. If you're a woman, you're a bitch, which is worse because women are held to a higher standard than men. Women are expected not to be caustic or abrasive in a way that, to a degree that men aren't. So of course, no one should be caustic or abrasive, especially not in the way that Caitlyn is. And Caitlyn is, it's more explicit. Like whenever I've mentioned this to someone, they say that Caitlyn's biggest sin is how she treats Jon. And I'll get to Jon in a little bit. Because she is quite horrible to him. But if you read through all the stuff here, we find a sort of subtle selfishness in everything she does. It's not enough to overwhelm any and all ethical redeemability she may have, but it does make her, I think, probably the least morally sound good guy, except maybe Sansa. And I guess that's a good segue to talk about Sansa. Sansa is the straw idealist. Well, to what extent there is one. That's another thing. There's not as much of a straw idealist in this. And I mean, I don't know, but Sansa is as close to a straw idealist as this book comes. And she is a straw idealist for the values of her culture and of the culture written about within this book, or the main one of the Seven Kingdoms, as opposed to those wacky Asian Dothraki. I've heard it's worse in the show where everyone is white, like everyone you see, where you actually see that everyone is white. Okay. Sansa is an 11-year-old girl who basically sees all of reality in terms of fairy tales. Which in her culture, given that she lives in medieval-ish type times, in her culture, fairy tales are much closer to reality than they are in our culture. In that they are basically the equivalent of what urban fantasy is to us. And she grows out of this by the end, but it's just so brilliant that he made the straw idealist be not a straw idealist for our culture. It's such a subversion of what grimdark shit would do. This is the Modica Magica of grimdark shit. It's set up with a premise that allows it to be grimdark shit, but it's good. And I guess my mind is blown because I guess I have read too much infuriating grimdark. Which is weird because I've not read all that much of it. But I've read apparently enough to make me surprised that it can be done right. By people other than George Orwell. Arya, let's talk about Arya. She's really good. She's kind of action girly, I guess, but really young. Action, that's not accurate. Arya's good. that's really all that needs to be said about her character arc. There's not much else to tell. You should just read the book for yourself if you're watching this and you haven't, then I don't even bother, because by telling you Eddard dies, I've ruined it for you. At least largely. There's still a little something at the end for you that I've not mentioned, but that someone else may well have spoiled for you. Anyways, I already have talked about Daenerys, how she's just this excellently morally gray character. Tyrion is another one where he's not really morally gray. He's basically evil, but he's not malevolent. He's just kind of self-focused. Like, you get the impression he doesn't really think about other people all that much. But he has this wonderful sarcasm and wit with which he lashes out against the other villains, because he's hanging around them. And that's brilliant. Jon is Jon Stark, and I'm calling him Jon Stark because he's a bastard in the sense of his parents were not married when he was born, and his father actually was married to a different woman, the aforementioned Catelyn. Catelyn is a bitch to him about this because, well, that's just how she is. Jon is probably the worst character because that's when George R.R. Martin comes the closest to sort of breaking down his restraint, because the universe kind of hates him. The universe hates Jon just little enough that it's forgivable. If it were much worse, I would have to call him a kind of a stain on the otherwise excellent nature of this novel. But he's not quite there. If it were, chiefly because when bad things happen to him, he gets in trouble, and then that's it. It fades away by the next scene he's in. And that's very important. Let's see. Let me make sure I've gotten all the characters. Let's see. Catelyn. Oh, yeah. Bran is a handicapped kid. His character is kind of hard to describe. Chiefly because he does develop a lot. Early on, he comes off as kind of small, spoken, kind of mild-mannered. He becomes pretty bitter, at least for a while, after he is harmed, after he's injured greatly and becomes crippled. But he kind of bounces back by the end. Robb, I love Robb. I hope Robb features prominently in A Clash of Kings, because I hope he's a viewpoint character, because he's the character I most want to know more about. Let me think. Trying to think, is there anything else I want to mention? Oh, Robert. Robert is probably, whereas Dany is the best done morally gray character, and whereas the best characters are probably Eddard, Sansa, and Arya, and possibly Caitlyn, though. Fuck, what was I about to say? I just got started. Okay. Robert is probably the worst example of moral grayness because he's the one who least he's the one who comes the closest to having that trying too hard thing I mentioned earlier, where because when you try too hard to make a morally gray character, you create a character who is irredeemably evil as a person, but who inexplicably does good things. Or who is completely good as a person, but inexplicably does evil things. The two sides, if you try too hard, the two sides of them won't mesh together properly, and you'll get the Mage Imperator, I guess. You'll get someone who is beneficent except when they're not, which is most of the time they're on screen, but a minority of the time when they exist. So, basically, the idea of Robert is that he is a good guy in his heart of hearts, but he's a hedonist and he beats his wife. Part of the reason why we're able to remain sympathetic to him, despite the fact that he beats his wife, is that she's a fucking evil, murderous, lying scumbag. Though he, of course, does not beat her for being any of those things, because he doesn't know she is. But nonetheless, it is kind of cathartic to think of her as an abuse. But, it's going to be someone. I'd have it be her. Because, she doesn't deserve it in a victim-blaming sense. But I think morally, it's kind of karmic. And maybe that's a problem with this novel. If you have a problem with that, take it up with George R. R. Martin, because he's the one who wrote it, such that a genuinely awful woman was also a domestic violence victim. Such that, now, the domestic violence thing, it lets you feel sympathy for her, but never too much, because at the end of the day, it's not an actual redeeming quality. Like, it's not as though she's less evil for being an abuse victim. Like, that's not the cause of anything she does. In a way, it almost kind of represents the lengths she's willing to go to acquire power, in that she's willing to stay in an abusive relationship to acquire power. And maybe that's problematic. I don't know. It definitely fits in within the context of the story. Definitely fits in well with her character. I would say that okay. Any other thoughts? The drive. Oh, this book is too long. Like, you notice, it took me a month to read it. The actual novel of it ends on page 807. And to give you an idea of what a page looks like, you can't see for shit. The typeset. Granted, this copy is somewhat physically this size compared to my hand. But it's I still feel like it's too long, and I feel like there are some scenes in this that are kind of gosh, what's the word? I think slice of lifey would be it's sort of just like showing random activities that the characters do that don't necessarily relate to anything else, or more likely, the scene will start 5 pages before it should have. And so it'll show them doing something random, and then they do something relevant to the plot. So, like, Arya is chasing cats, and then she overhears monsters, and the sewer is established as a means for her to escape the King's Landing later. Or, I don't know, I just feel like I can't, maybe this novel's length is justified insofar as I find it hard to think of anything that they definitely could have cut. The only thing I can think of that I would say that they probably should have cut would be the plot cul-de-sac wherein Catelyn kidnaps Tyrion. Because that seems to exist primarily to give Tyrion and Catelyn something to do during the middle of the book, while Eddard is off investigating to find out about the incest. And Bran is just kind of sitting at Winterfell doing nothing. No reason that Catelyn can't have just been sitting at Winterfell doing nothing, but she had to kidnap Tyrion. And I mean, granted, we do get to see some epic Tyrion stuff as a result of that. Let's think. Not entirely sure how long I've been going on here. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, regarding the character deaths, when I first opened this, I pretty quickly had Eddard pinned. Because, okay, I figure that Game of Thrones that A Song of Ice and Fire, I should call it, can't possibly be as deathy as people say. Because someone has to live through the entire series. Otherwise, what's the point of the earlier books? So, like, either Jon or Bran or Catelyn or Tyrion or Sansa or Arya has to make it through. And probably at least 2 of those characters. Or I don't know, maybe Robb will be the long-term survivor. I kind of doubt it, both because he's in a vulnerable position and because he was not given anywhere near the attention I felt he deserved. Because I like him better than I like just about anyone else. Jon was my favorite to start out with, but he kind of faded as he, 1, showed himself to be a bit of an idiot, and 2, showed himself to have that problem of the universe hating him just a little more than is believable. Oh, okay, predictions. And don't anyone go posting spoilers down there for me. Currently, I know for a fact that Arya makes it past book 3, and that Dany makes it past book 4, or dies and comes back to life later. Other than that, I'm gonna be hilariously wrong here, but as I try to predict, who makes it and who doesn't, because of course, my track record is so good, I'm going to peg Sansa for a quick death, probably in book 3. Caitlyn's not going to make it through the entire series. Neither is Rob. John is at least going to last until John's going to last until we need a viewpoint, until we stop needing a viewpoint at the wall, at which point he will die very quickly. And mostly because the universe hates him. Let's see. What else? I'm hesitant to guess, but okay, I want to pin at least one more character down to survive, at least for the long haul. I'm gonna give that to other than Tyrion. Oh, and Tyrion I know makes it. So Tyrion, Arya, and Daenerys. Actually, that's probably enough because if those are the only three characters that survive for the long haul, that's probably enough because Arya can be the sympathetic character to make it the whole way. Bran, really any of the Stark children could serve that. Really, any of the Starks could serve that function. And I'm counting Jon as a Stark because he is one, damn it. Because my culture, my rules. I get to call him whatever the fuck I want. And because he kind of functions, at least partially, as one of the Starks. He and Caitlyn have one scene together to show how horrible she is to him. And it ends there. But, okay. Joffrey... Let's see. Other characters I want to pin for death. Trying to think, or pin for death or for life. I'll just try to make. Okay, I've already said Dany, Arya, Sansa. Rob, I have pinned to make it until late in book 2. I'm saying late in book 2 he dies. Or who knows, he may make it. That one's not that competent. Joffrey. Here's another, because I knew pretty much from the moment we met him that King Robert was going to die, because it's not a Game of Thrones until the identity of the king is in dispute. And so I knew that was going to happen before it did. And so that's what makes me wonder if Joffrey's days are numbered. Because that him dying puts the identity of the king even more in dispute. And another thing, that would also put Cersei in a somewhat desperate situation. It would force her to do something drastic. And that would be interesting, because we've yet to see her not have a handle on things. Which, while I'm at this, I'm going to go ahead and pin her to make it. I don't know. Should I trust this to be able to defy grimdark conventions and kill a villain relatively early on? Or should I? So I'm going to say Cersei dies in either book 3, 4, or 5. She at least makes it to the end of book 2. Probably past that. Probably, I would say she probably is gonna. I would say she's probably alive as of the end of A Dance with Dragons. To be completely honest. But anyways, guessing game is over. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Oh, Jamie. Gosh, I hope Jamie dies soon. Because I hate him, because he's horrible. And also just because he's, I don't know, he's not gotten much to him so far, I guess. So anyways, that wraps up Game of Thrones. It's amazing, and any of you who haven't should still read it, even though you know that Eddard dies. That won't ruin the whole book for you, because the twist at the very end I didn't reveal, and it is glorious. Anyways, for the next, I'm going to take a look at. After having read this 800-page tome, I've decided to go for a breather, namely Animal Farm, which, like, you cannot tell at all that this is what this is. This is 1984 and Animal Farm bound into one. I read 1984 out of this, and since I've already read it, you're probably not going to get a book vlog out of it. But Animal Farm, at least in this binding, starts on page 3 and ends on page, I believe, 88. No, 84. 80 pages. 81 pages, oh my goodness. I'm going to knock this out in like 3 days and already be on to another book rather than have it be over a month. You wouldn't believe how I felt finishing this novel, because, I mean, it left me wanting more, but I'm smarter than that. I know that even though this was really only just starting to wear me out, I know that I would definitely hit exhaust. I would definitely hit doesn't want to read anymore 300 pages into Clash of Kings. And then I'd just have 700 pages to go before I could read something else. Unless I wanted to read multiple books at a time, in which case I would never finish Clash of Kings. Because it's 1,000 fucking pages long. Like, seriously, George R.R. Martin, you need to condense your books. Or split them. Those are your options. Condense or split. Like, maybe you would find it easier to finish A Song of Ice and Fire if, instead of having like 3 1,500-page books, or two is what Wikipedia claims. I've heard 3, but let's go with 2. Instead of having 2 1,500-page books, why not just write 10 300-page books? The TV show can just include, 3 books to a season. So yeah, that's all I have to say. I look forward to doing Animal Farm for you. And then, I don't know, probably either Percy Jackson and the Olympians or The Strain. So with that said, goodbye.